All right. Sorry about the technical difficulties today, but we're going to make a recording of the review and I'll post it. The exam opens on Friday and will be open until Monday. You have to take it sometime between them. It's 1 hour, about 40 questions, including one essay. Again, with these exams, nobody knows this to begin with, so it's all about planning some time for studying and studying wisely. And so that means spending lots of time, but using active methods. That's like taking notes, writing things down, making review sheets, making flashcards, practicing with flashcards or with a partner, and doing these in small bits. That's how our memory works. Is we work best if we have small study sessions with breaks between them. Okay, so this is I think our fifth exam. It covers chapters 11, a little bit of 12, and a little bit of 15. And the major thing we're going to be doing is defining some topics on evolution and natural selection, going over the evidence for that theory, talking about how evolution works in populations with alleles, and then reviewing the evidence we have for animal evolution and humans and primates. Okay, evolution is a theory, so this is a good time to review what is a theory. A theory is a scientific idea that explains existing observations, makes testable predictions that then are borne out and provide new evidence for the strength of that theory. A theory is our best idea, what we think is true. We may not be right, but it's our best idea. So, what is the theory of evolution? Well, it's not the same as when Darwin proposed it. Evolution now is genetic change in populations of organisms, change that occurs over time. Gradually, organisms get more complex. There's progressive change, and it's a historical process, so it builds on past changes. The basic mechanism we think of evolution is natural selection. That's the differential reproduction of genotypes caused by factors in the environment and that lead to change in genetic change in populations. So essentially, some individuals are better at surviving and reproducing. And the second part is important, reproducing. And so their genes are more likely to wind up in the next generation. And so natural selection constantly matches organisms to their environment. For natural selection to occur, individuals have to have genetic variation. They can't all be identical. And that variation has to be due to inherited traits. We know that more offspring are produced than can survive and go on to reproduce on their own. So natural selection is dependent upon individuals having unequal success. Some individuals leave more offspring, others not so much. Okay, so what is the evidence? Well, there are multiple lines of evidence here, and I've got them listed. And so there's lots of evidence in lots of different fields. I'm going to go through some of the evidence here. This is a picture of Archaeopteryx, one of the best pieces of evidence for evolution. It's not really explainable unless you assume organisms change. Okay, one of the most important pieces is artificial selection. Okay, humans have been able to select desirable traits and produce change in populations of domesticated organisms. And this change has been pretty rapid, and it's been able to produce a diversity of different breeds. Here are some dog breeds selected for different things. There's I think a basset hound there selected to be able to differentiate smells. There's a beagle pup. They're selected to run and chase and hunt and bark. Shar-Peis are the middle guy there. They're selected as family protection, very protective dogs, and a bunch of the other ones look like lap dogs. They're selected to be cute, have flat faces, and sit on people's laps. But all of these come from one ancestral breed or species and then have been selected. And humans have controlled them and controlled reproduction to produce these traits. And we've done this not just with dogs and cats, but we've done it with domesticated plants, farm animals. And the evidence for this was overwhelming during Darwin's time. Okay, it was really important. The other thing that was overwhelming was they were becoming aware of the fossil record, that the Earth was old, very old. And they could just tell by the number of layers of sedimentary rock that had been deposited over time. But we now know that with radioactive dating, that the Earth is many millions of years old. Also, they were aware that fossils had changed, that the farther back you looked, the deeper and deeper it was, the less it looked like living organisms. The oldest fossils were very simple, bacteria. More recent fossils included animals in marine environments, and then even more recent are land plants, and then finally vertebrates. As things get more modern, they become more similar to living organisms. And we have one of the big pieces of evidence is that we have organisms that have traits of no living organism in the fossil record that appear to be intermediates or transitions between reptiles and birds, fish and amphibians, things like that. So really important. Biogeography, the plant and animal distribution. There was a lot of questions on why are there so many species? Why do islands have few species, but many that are unusual? And why do islands have species that resemble the nearest mainland? The obvious answer was organisms change over time. They become adapted to their habitats. Particularly the large number of flightless birds on islands was very persuasive. And birds that, like Darwin's finches, that resembled birds from the mainland but had changed from mainland birds. And so there was variation in different islands, and so that was really obvious. And then looking at the anatomy of organisms, they were able to identify homologies, structures that were similar due to common descent. They were inherited from a common ancestor. Here's some mammal limbs that show the same elements in them, and these homologies develop from the same tissues in the embryo. In addition, you could identify in the anatomy of animals structures with no apparent function. These are called vestigial structures, but that must have been, present in an ancestor and just inherited. These include like hip bones in whales. Whales don't have limbs. There's no need for a hip bone, but they have them. Presumably they had an ancestor that needed them. Okay, and then we can even get to similarities in molecules, looking at DNA and proteins and things like that. Okay, then there was a section on how evolution occurs. It occurs within populations. It's not about individuals, it's about populations. So the change in what alleles are common is common in a population. And changes in evolution reflect the fitness, the ability of an individual to do what they can to produce offspring, and that's their contribution to succeeding generations. We can identify why allele frequencies change and why they stay the same. Here's a list of things why they stay the same. Any of those things change and allele frequencies will change. You don't have to know the equation, it won't be on the exam. One thing to note in that with islands is that small populations change quickly for random reasons. Just the small initial population or random changes due to, a few unlucky individuals don't breed and so their genes disappear completely. And then migration affects these. I went through a nice example of humans evolving resistance to a disease, and the allele I talked about was the sickle cell allele. That allele is very unfavorable in most cases, but if the disease malaria is present, that allele is strongly favored because it provides some resistance to the disease. So a good example with humans. Okay, chapter 12 began with a discussion of classification of organisms, And so they talked about the domains, kingdoms, and things like that. And these classification systems are based on shared characteristics. As you go towards domains, these are a few broad characteristics that are shared. Towards the species level, then they share many, many characteristics, including all those other ones. So the goal of taxonomy is to construct phylogenies, and these show the evolutionary relationship among organisms. It's their family tree. And so here's a family tree of the archosaurs. This includes the crocodiles, dinosaurs, and birds. They share a large number of features that were present in a common ancestor. And this shows that turtles don't have any of those features, but these guys do. And those include things like hollow bones, four-chambered hearts, high metabolism, extensive parental care, stuff like that. Okay, then I went into the discussion of animals and animal evolution. Animals share a bunch of characteristics listed here. Probably most notable is they have tissues that aren't found in any other groups, muscle and nerve tissue. So that allows them to move quickly. And so I went through some of the main groups here. And then I went through the features that we share with some other organisms. We're deuterostomes and we're chordates. And chordates have four features that you don't really see in externally, at least in adult humans, but you see them in the embryo. And so we have a dorsal hollow nerve tube, okay, that forwardly is developed into our brain. We have a structural support called a notochord in the embryo. Later on, that's partially replaced by vertebrae. We develop in the embryo pharyngeal slits, pouches, that eventually form our jaws and other structures. But in adult chordates, they were gill slits. And then we have a post-anal tail, okay, that we don't see in the adult. Okay. When I talked about humans, then I talked about the characteristics that we share with mammals. We have all the basic mammal characteristics: hair, internal development with a placenta. We nourish young with mammary glands, big brains, active, warm body temperature. We are primates. We have very mobile hands and feet with opposable thumbs. We have big brains, forward directing eyes. With the hominids, like the other hominids, we have fingernails and no tail. And there are a series of transitional fossils between us and the most closely related living hominids, like chimpanzees, that are even more similar. Their skeletal material looks more like ours. We can find evidence that they made tools and used fire and things like that. Okay, so then I'm going to end up with the essay questions. The first one is on natural selection and artificial selection. Compare and contrast that. That means find the similarities and differences. Basically, the differences are humans control artificial selection, and so it's fast and it's kind of at whatever we're interested in. And so we control the breeding, and we can quickly produce strains or subspecies that are very different from the original animal. Natural selection is slow. It's different in different environments, and it can change over time. So some examples are like the peppered moth. That's an example of a change in the environment that led to a change in selection. You could go over any of the domestic animal things like this. And you should note that this was really important for Darwin, because he was surrounded by a farming community. He owned farms and worked with farmers and certainly read about artificial selection. Then the second question is about the term theory and its meaning in science, and is evolution a theory? Okay, and in science, the term theory means an idea that's been tested and all the existing observations and evidence support that idea. And certainly evolution by natural selection meets that. There are multiple lines of evidence that support that. And so you don't have to describe them in super detail, but you could say like fossils, similarities with artificial selection, so on and so forth. Okay, so it's quite long, but I'm going to stop there. Okay, you're going to take this exam at home, online. You have 1 hour and one attempt. Okay, study hard and good luck.